Hi friends, it's Janet and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you the next 3 cards in the Art Impressions Watercolor Journal adventure that I'm on, except that I'm using Copic markers instead of watercolor because I thought it would be fun to show how you can use these stamps and other stamps in the catalog to make this journal. It's not just for watercolor. So I only have 2 pages after these 3 are done, and then my series will be complete. So here's a sneak peek of them, and let's look at what I'm using to make these cards today. First of all, I'm using the little truck set. This is a new watercolor journal set, and I'm using this little tree from the Holiday Mansion accessory set to put in the back of it. I use a sentiment from the new Christmas sentiment set, and this is a great little set. In this case, I use the season greetings sentiment. Then I'm using another stamp set that's new, Victorian house and barn set, and I'm going to be making both the barn and the house. One nice feature about this is that the fence is part of the stamp set for both of these buildings, so it makes it pretty easy to set the scene. So here's the barn all stamped and ready to go, and you might notice that I have like a filigree edge on the left side of it. I'm going to show you how I do that. I cut my cardstock about 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. And on the long side, I used the die that comes in the die set for the journal. Now on the ends of the first card, I kind of have a widow on each side where a loop is hanging free. So I'm trying to do that better this time. I started it right at the end, and then I'm attaching that with a little piece of Best Ever craft tape from Spellbinders. And then I'm running that through my die cutting machine. So when this gets done and we see it back, it's going to have that lacy edge to it. And this will also make the piece a little bit less wide as well. And this really cuts nicely. It hardly takes anything to get the little pieces out of it. And you've got this nice lacy edge. And it did do a little better. I just decided to trim this end piece a little bit more. But overall, that turned out a little bit nicer. So there's a tip for you there. It's not a deal breaker, I don't think, but it does look better if it's not hanging free on both ends there. So I wanted to show you that I purposely stamped these the way that I did, so because the fences go a little bit angled, and so I made this so the 2 angles went into each other. I just think it looks a little better that way when you have 2 pages facing each other. But I guess it's really your own preference. That's just mine. You could do it the opposite way. Anything is possible when you're making your own things. That's the great thing about doing it. Now I'm using gray flannel. This is a Memento ink. It's definitely Copic friendly, and I'm just dropping that lightly on my cardstock. Any places that I have some missing, I'm just lightly touching it. I'm trying to get a visible line from the stamp, but I don't want it to be extremely strong because I'm trying to achieve a little bit more of a no line coloring technique. Now here's that adorable truck, and I'm going to show you how I masked to get the Christmas tree to be in it without messing up the truck image. And so I'm just taking a piece of post-it note paper, cutting it in half, and on the sticky side being at the top, I'm going to lay that across the edge of the bed of the truck. So just at the edge of it. Not too far, but pretty much just right on it. Then I'm going to use the other half and put it the other way on the truck. And this is going to give you enough coverage so that I can stamp the tree in there without having any of it go into the truck image. Super simple, very quick and easy. I thought it would be fun to show you this. Nothing fancy. A post-it note will do a lot of times for masking, especially when we've got straight lines in this truck. So as you can see, I'm just going to line this up until I kind of think I want it to look that way. I put the angle up a little higher at the last minute, and then I'm just going to stamp that right down. And this is a block from Art Impressions, by the way. I love their blocks. They're just plain. You can see right through them. I've had other blocks with funny edges, like swirly edges and stuff. This is really easy to hang on to. I think they're great blocks. But anyway, I digress. So here you are with that tree in the back of the truck, and you would never know that it didn't come that way. And that's what I love about masking, is you can change your image by adding other stamps that necessarily didn't come that way with it, but yet makes it so much cuter. So I am going to color this red because, you know, Christmas trucks, they are traditionally red. I mean, the red truck has been a mainstay now for many years. So I'm not going to deviate from that pattern. I'm using my trusty red combo of R29 for the darker color and R24 for the lighter. And you're just going to see me here do all the outlining and put in where I believe there should be some shadows. And just remember that whenever something is sitting in front of another object, there should be shadow behind it. So that's why, like the wheel wells there, I put a strong line of darker red right along the edges of them, because that's where you would see a shadow. So here I come in with the R24, and I'm going to fill all the white space in and blend in some of the darker red, and that will make for a pretty truck. I do add some additional color. There are a couple layers of color in most of this, and typically when I use the R24 and R29, I do go back and use a little bit of the darker color, the R29, to put back some shadow, because I do find that the R24, though beautiful, does tend to kind of lighten up the darker color so much that it loses a lot of the good definition that you get with it. So I'll come back with that darker color many times. And so that is what I did here. You can see I'm bringing back R29 and just making those shadows a little bit more bold again, because they lightened up too much, at least for my liking. And then I bring back the R24, and I will continue to blend until I feel like this is in good shape. And there you go. So next I'm going to work on the tires, and these are going to be grays, just a series of light gray to dark gray. So starting with C1, I'm doing the hubcaps of the truck and also the front bumper, and that's with C1. Then I'll use C0 to kind of lighten that up a little bit. And then I have C7, which I'm using to outline the edges of the tires, because they are going to be darker looking. They're on the edges, so that they just naturally are going to be darker. And then we're going to use C5 in the center, and that's going to go around the hubcap and then also blend in with the darker C7 on the edges. And then I'm going to go back with C7 and put in my lines again a little bit more, use C5, blending it out. And I just keep doing that until I get it kind of the way I want. Same with the hubcap. I'm going to use a little C5 there, and then some C1 to blend that in a bit more. And also I used C1 again on the outer edges of the hubcap and also on the rear view mirror. Then I came back with C3 and added a little more detail to the mirror, because it just sort of disappeared. It just became a gray blob. Then I'm using my black micron pen to put in a little more detail. And finally, I'm adding some B000 into the window to look like a blue type glass reflection. A dab of Y15 goes for the headlamp, and then I'm going to use B25 to start on the Christmas tree, and this is the garland on the tree. That's a pretty blue. It's not an overwhelming blue. It's kind of a neutral blue, actually, is what I would call it. And so I just had to figure out where that went. It's a little hard to make it out, but I think I got it right. And then I'm using G21 for the majority of the tree, and I'm just going to use G21 through all the green areas on the tree initially. Then I'm going to come back with a darker color and put in a little bit of shade. But this is a really small area, actually, when you're working on it, because of all the Christmas decorations on it and so on. So initially, I just thought it would be easier to use that, and then come back with the G24 and add some shadows and put back in kind of the layers of the tree, and that gives it a more dimensional look again. I actually like this combo quite a bit. And then R22, it's kind of a brighter pink, almost a reddish pink, and I'm using that for the Christmas bulbs on the tree. And now I'm going to use G24 again, coming back in. I just thought it needed a little bit more shading, especially on the back side of the tree, which of course would have more shadow and darker areas than at the front. And that will complete the tree, other than I decided to add just a little bit of lines back in for where the bulbs are. Here's where I use the Christmas sentiment set. I had stamped and cut this out with a die from the watercolor journal set. I love this little die because it's really nicely sized for greetings, and it can easily handle one line, but also multiple lines, perhaps even up to 3 lines if you had a smaller, sentiment there to work with, but for sure 2 lines. But the season's greetings works perfectly on it. I just put it above the truck, as you can see, and then I'm going to use a heart rhinestone. I decided to go with a larger white one so that it would stand out against the red of the greeting, and just center that. Now there's always glue at the back of these gems, but I find it's just a good insurance policy to put a dab of glue before you set them, because that makes sure they're going nowhere. I've had too many of these, and it doesn't matter what brand, but they tend to pop off because over time the adhesive just doesn't stay put. So I just try to always remember to use a little bit of glue. Now something like this is a strip adhesive of gems, and this also has some pearls in it. I don't put glue behind these because they tend to stay. I guess because they're, there's a longer strip of glue adhesive there. So I don't bother with it when I'm using something like this. But I thought the black gems with the white pearls would be a nice touch to act almost, well, really to suggest that there might be gravel and snow on the road. It's definitely abstract, but it gives me that impression or that feel, and that's what I'm looking for. Of course, you want to put it on straight. I did have to redo that a little bit. I don't know about you guys. I have trouble with straight. A lot of times I'm just a little bit cockeyed when I'm putting things on. So I have to stop and look it over and just make sure it is straight before I move on. So this is pretty much ready to put in my book, but then I decided that I would like to add a little more sparkle here. So I used my Ranger Stickles in Candy Cane, which is a nice red. So I just dabbed a tiny bit of it on each of the bulbs on this tree. And it did do the job. It made everything a little bit more cheery, a little more bright, and it added a little shine, which I just think was a perfect touch to it. And that is the finished card. Once it dries, it's ready to go in the book, just as it is. All right, so on to page 2. This is the Victorian barn, which is a great image. And I'm going to make the bottom part of this barn white. So I'm using my CO and C1 to do that. Really, when you're doing white, it doesn't take long because you're just giving a hint of shadow. White is never a flat white, so all you need to do is just put in some shadows around the edges generally, and maybe do a little bit of blending. And in my case, I use C1 for the darker color most times, and then CO to lighten it up. Some people go even darker, but to me that's perfect for a hint of white. Then I'm going to do the upper part of my barn, which I made red, and I'm using the R29 to outline and shadow with. And then you guessed it, I'm going to use R24 to fill that in, and then do a little bit more blending. Now you could make this even a little fancier. On the packaging, you'll see that they drew in just faint lines to indicate on the top there that there are boards. That looks great. I would highly recommend you give it a try. I didn't do it in my case. I just wanted to keep it very simple and fast, but you can't hurt it by adding a little more detail like that. And it really does add a lot to the image. So I encourage you to try it. Then I've done the top of the silo with a little bit more of darker C5, as well as the roofs on the little tops of the barn. I'm not sure what you would call those, but using C5, C1 on that. And then I'm going to go next to the main roof, which I'm using C7 as the darkest color. And this roof is going to be pretty dark, all in all. But where I'm from, the barn roofs are pretty much black. And the reason is because it's cold where I grew up. And so the black roof of a barn helps to keep the barn warm for the animals, believe it or not. That's why they're usually a dark black. So I just had to do that. It was just natural, if you will. So this is mostly C5 with some C7 to shade. Then I also used C5 to outline the barn doors. And I'll use R24 inside with an outline of R29. And here again is where you could put some more details on the door. You could put X's on the door in each of those little frames like the packaging suggests. I would even suggest you could do the base of the barn and make it look like brick. I think that would be a nice touch as well. You could also draw in some shingles, just give a hint of shingles in that roof. I think that would work well too. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of what you could do to enhance the barn just a little bit more. I thought that I would try the Y15 in the windows, at least the bottom lower level windows, and then I'm using C5 in the upper windows because I don't think there'll be light up there. That's where the hay is generally. So you're going to be working in the bottom part and the lights would be on there. Now I'm going to work on the fence, and this is E37 for my darker color, and I'm putting in the shadow. I'm doing the lines where you've got the boards in front of the post, so you could see why I hopefully outlined that. That's, in my view, where the shadows would show up. And then I'm just filling that in with E35. These colors are close enough. I really didn't feel I needed to do a lot of blending. And also the colors are very close together, so you are kind of naturally blending it when you're filling it in. So I was pretty much happy with how that turned out with one pass. Now I'm going to use B000 to put in some blue sky background, and 0 colorless blender. That's what I'm going to use to even further lighten that up a bit so that it fades out and looks a bit more like a light watercolor wash. And finally I decided to add some snow. So this again is Ranger Stickles, but this time I'm using Stardust. I added it below the barn, along the fence posts, and then I added it a little bit between the fence posts just to give you the feeling that there's snow across the whole foreground there without actually having to cover the whole thing. So there you go. That is the barn. Now here is the house, and this is very cute also, and it does really remind me of some of the farmhouses that I grew up with. And the first thing is to use E33 to color in the chimney area, and then I'm going to go back with C7 and dot in where the rock is. And I do think that after you do this, it might look better if you took a micron pen and then drew around them so they have a solid line or border around each stone. I think it would look a little bit neater than how mine turned out. And I might try that, go back and outline each stone. It would be a quick thing to do. Then I'm going to start working on the house, and this time I'm going to use a red roof and a black roof. The top roof is red, so yes, I've got R24 that I'm filling in the entire roof with initially. And then I decided I would come back with R29. So sometimes I outline it first with the darker color and then bring in the light, and sometimes I do the whole area with light and bring in the dark after. I don't know why I chose to do it this way versus the dark first, but it didn't really matter all that much. I have heard other designers say that you use less ink if you put in your darker color first. So there you go. I mean, I guess that might be the case. If you want to conserve your ink a little bit, you could always do your dark first based on the recommendations of artists that should know. But I think it's really just up to you. And with these little figures, you can do it any way you want, really. You're not going to be particularly wasting a ton of ink or anything on these. If you're doing a whole entire 8.5 by 11, okay, maybe that is more important. But now I'm using C1 and C0 to do the white of the house. And then I'm going to come back with C5 and just do a little bit more outlining so that the house has a bit more definition. Because again, I use the light gray to stamp this image, and for the most part I like that, but sometimes you have to put in a little bit more detail back so that the images have more detail. But the great thing is when you're doing that with your marker, it looks like you drew it rather than a stamped black image. So that's kind of the no line coloring. All right, so here's the black roof with C7 to outline and C5 to fill in. So this is a Victorian house with a little panache. It's got 2 colors of roof. Now I used the dark gray to do the steps, but I came back with my micron pen to put in a little more detail back. And then it's Y15 again in the windows. The fence is going to be exactly the way that I handled the other one, with E37 first and putting in the shadow and the darker areas. And with a fence, you're usually going to get darker color at the bottom of each fence piece. So you're going to see that I do come back with E37 because I realized I didn't do that the first time around with it. And it's going to be lighter at the top of each fence. So that's why I'm using the E37 then to fill in. And there you go with that fence. Now I'm going to add again with B000 some of the blue sky appearing color, and then 0 to lighten that all up. And then I'm going to use the stickles again. This is the Ranger Stardust. I think it makes a great snow though. And again, just underneath the house, in between the rungs of the fence, and a little bit along the fence poles, and voila, you have this nice winter image. So I'm going to set these aside and let them dry. Oh yeah, I did put some on the top of the house too. I thought that would be a nice touch. I did that on the barn, and I don't think I mentioned that, but yes, I think that is a nice thing to do. So here we have the barn, and I'm going to do that there. So I guess it was an afterthought. I did it on the house and then thought, yeah, I'll go back and put it on the barn. Okay, so here are the 3 cards together, and I think they turned out wonderfully. After thinking about it a little bit, I decided to try adding glossy accents over each of the window panes. And I think that did add a nice touch to it. And it also looks a little more dimensional too. One last thing I did with these pages is I used tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink and a blending brush and just went around the edges of my pages. So that does it for this week's episode, pages 11 through 13. I'll be back on Friday with the final 2 pages, and we'll take a look at the whole entire journal again and just have a kind of a review of the whole process. So have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.